My name is Marshall Ewing. I was in the Navy, and I was in the Korean theater. Well, I grew up in Georgetown, Texas, and ever since I was very young, I wanted to fly planes. We lived out on a farm, and we were right under the airways between Dallas and San Antonio, and the World War II planes would come over, a lot of them at night on navigation flights. But during the day, we'd have flights of P-38s or P-47s, maybe a P-51 now and then would fly over. And I'd look up at those P-38s especially and say, boy, if I could fly one of those, it'd be sure fine. After I got out of high school in 1947, I had joined the Naval Reserve, and so I had a taste of the Navy. I got to go on a cruise on a destroyer out of New Orleans for one summer. And the next year I went to Southwestern and spent a year in college, but I didn't do too good. I didn't have my mind on my work. In fact, I flunked a couple of courses. So long about, I guess, August or September, another couple of buddies and me decided we were going to join the Navy. So we did. We joined the Navy, and we got our orders to San Diego. And we left in September, I believe it was, in 1948. And they gave us tickets on the train and dining car privileges and sleeper car privileges. So we really felt like we were in high cotton. So we went out to San Diego, and on the way out there, I guess it was the next morning probably, the train stopped in El Paso, and my buddies and I decided it was time to go have a beer. So we left the train for about 30 minutes or so, and when we got back, the train had left the station. So there we are, stranded in El Paso, hadn't even gotten in the Navy good, and we're already AWOL. But anyway, we caught the next train, which was about an hour or so later. And we got out to San Diego, and of course everything was all right. They talked to us a little bit, but it wasn't too bad. Anyway, we started our boot camp training, and I guess about a month after we were in boot camp, they came around and told us that anybody who wanted to take the NAVCAD test, that's Naval Air Cadet test, could take that. And my buddy and I, one of my buddies and I, took it. And that happened in February of 1950. So I went to Pensacola and went through the pre-flight training and basic training in 3 different fields. And we did all the normal activities you do learning to fly, navigation and formation flying and gunnery and well, all that sort of stuff. And then I got orders to go to Corpus Christi for operational training, bigger planes. And I flew the F-6 Hellcat down in Corpus Christi for my operational training. And then we came back to Pensacola for carrier qualification training. And we did that on land. They had a flight deck simulation out there on the runway. And we would fly a pattern just like we would coming aboard a carrier. And so we did that for about a month, learned how to do all that. And then they said, well, you're going to go get to do the real thing today. So 6 of us flew out to the USS Monterey, which was a small carrier, jeep carrier. And we shot 6 landings apiece. And I got to tell you, when I flew up over the carrier and looked down at it and saw how small it was, I got a big lump in my throat. I said, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do that or not. But anyway, with the training we had, it all paid off, and we did it fine. Then flew back to the base. And then we got our wings. I got my wings, I guess, in about July of 1951. Excuse me. And then I got orders to take my instrument training in San Diego. And so I did my instrument work there in San Diego. Then I got orders to jet training school in Kingsville, Texas. So I went down there. I guess that must have been about September of 1951, and I flew the F-80, or the TV2, I think we called them back in those days. A T-33, but we got one out here. Anyway, they had several designations depending on what service were you in, what they called them. But anyway, I did about a month of training in jets there, and finished that course, and then I got orders to a fighter squadron out in San Diego. It was VF 871, and it was a reserve squadron that had been called up to duty for Korea in 1950, and it was Oakland, California Naval Reserve Station, and they flew Corsairs. And so I joined that squadron, and we trained. Actually, they were in a retraining phase from the first cruise. They'd been already out to Korea once. So I retrained with them, and we did all the normal work that you do in training, like formation flying and gunnery practice and dropping bombs and shooting rockets and all that sort of stuff. And then we shipped out to Korea on the USS Essex. So I was out overseas in the area of Korea for about 6 months, 6 to 8 months, really, overall. And I flew 56 missions while I was over there, and we would be out maybe 2 or 3 weeks at a time. Then we'd go into Japan for R&R. We called it rest and relaxation, or relaxation and recreation, or whatever. Anyway, we'd be in port maybe a week, and then we'd go back out, and then we'd resume our missions, flying our missions, and they would consist of bombing, rocket firing, or close air support with the troops on the front line. I did about 3 hops where I would spot for the battleship Missouri. I would watch the Missouri shoot their big cannons over to Korea, and then I would tell them how much to move one way or the other to get on target. And then they would fire another round, and I'd tell them how to move so much one way or the other to get closer to the target. And when I felt like they were pretty close to the target, then I would tell them to fire for effect, and they'd really cut loose a barrage of shells. And those shells were so big you could see them going through the air. They weren't high speed. There was a lot of weight to them. I think each one probably weighed a ton. I'm just guessing. But anyway, they would do that, and we'd watch for them. And so I did that, I think, about 3 hops. But most of the time, we would fly in 8-plane divisions, and we'd fly over. And sometimes we would be with other planes on our ship. We had a squadron of dive bombers, the AD Sky Raider, which we have one out here. And then we had 2 squadrons of jets. Generally, the jets would take off after us, and they'd land first because they couldn't stay up in the air as long as we could. Well, our hops normally ran about 3 to 3.5 hours, and theirs lasted maybe about an hour and a half. We lost 4 pilots while I was out there through various reasons. We lost our operations officer through flak. I wasn't on the flight that he was on, but they said all of a sudden his plane just kind of peeled off a slow curve like it and just headed into the ground. But that was the only one we lost in our squadron, and we had one taken prisoner. And one got shot down. Well, he bailed out of his plane, and as he was floating down, just as he got to the ground, well, the gooks came out and took his pistol away from him and shot at him 6 times. We all carried 38 revolvers, and they had 6 shells. And they shot at him 6 times and missed him every time. And by that time, the helicopter, our rescue helicopter, had gotten in there and picked him up. And then we had another fella on a trip. He was ahead of us, and we don't know how it happened, but somebody dropped a bomb over him, close enough to him where it hit his plane, and he had a lot of flame damage to his face. Had a lot of plastic surgery to get him back to where he was halfway presentable, but it was a very tragic affair. One kind of amusing incident coming back one day. It was the seas were pretty rough. We had probably 20, 25 foot seas that day, and the ship was bobbing up and down. And as you know, the LSO was back there directing traffic. You know, he's guiding your plane in. You'll start out off to the beam out here, several hundred yards, several thousand yards probably, and you'd fly around a slow path around to the rear of the carrier. He'll either straighten you one way or bring you up or move you down to get your attitude just right. So when you get to the carrier in a position to take a cut, then your plane is ready to land. I mean, it's just hanging on the prop. So when you're ready to land, he gives you the cut. You pull the power off, you dip the nose just a little bit and flare it back, and then you're ready for a 3-point landing. Hopefully you'll catch a cable. That's what that tail hook is on the back of that plane. And you've got about 8 cables, I think, across that carrier. And they like to cut you where you'd catch maybe between 3 and 5 or 3 and 6. They don't want to cut you too close to the tail end of the ship because you're liable to hit it somehow. But anyway, if that tail, if the back end of the ship, stern, they call it the stern, if the stern is coming up when you're in position to take a cut, they won't cut you because you might hit the stern. Same way if it's dropping out from under you, because you know you wouldn't be in a good position to land. So I flew that route, flew that pattern 5 times and got 5 wave offs. And on the 6th pass, I heard the air boss come on air, and he was talking to the LSO. Jokingly, of course, but he said, if we don't get him down this time, shoot him down. So that was kind of a funny incident. And then another incident I had, well, the last person who would land at the end of a cruise, he would get a cake. So I just happened to be the last one in our air group that landed, and when I landed, all these people rushed out there and they had this big old cake. So I got a picture with myself having this big old cake. So we all dove into that cake and enjoyed that. But actually, we like I say, we were out there about 8 or 9 months. Then we came back to San Diego, and I believe, I'm pretty sure we moved out to Miramar, which is another Navy base, and we changed Corsairs to jets. We got F-9, F-2 Panther jets. So we started training in those. Went through this kind of the same sequence of events and training, gunnery and rocket firing and dropping bombs, and had cross-country navigation trips and night flying and carrier qualification. And after being out there about 2 months, well, they were looking for some Panther planes to fly for a movie. And this movie was based on a pilot who had gotten hit in the cockpit by flak out in Korea, and it blinded him. And he was up there floundering around. He just couldn't see it. So he got on the air and called out, said he was blind, he couldn't see. And so his buddy told him to waggle his wings so he could identify where he was. So he started wagging his wings, and his buddy picked him up, and it just happened to be his roommate on the ship. So he said, well, stay where you are, level your wings out. He was kind of in a climb right at that point. So he told him to level out. And he came back and got on his wing, and they talked to each other. And he was able to talk him down to an emergency field in Korea. But of course the Navy, the Hollywood has to glamorize all this type of stuff. So they had him in a jet landing on the carrier. But in true life, the true story, he was in an AD dive bomber, and he landed over in Korea on land with his wheels up. So, you know, it'd be a lot easier when you're blinded to land with your wheels up, trying to land on wheels. So that was interesting. My last hop in July of '54. And by then I had decided that I was going to get out and go back to school, try to give college another try. So I did. I got out and went to Texas Tech and studied petroleum engineering. And since then, I've done no flying. I went and finished, got my degree in petroleum engineering, and went in the oil field. Worked for Sinclair, and then in '69, Atlantic Richfield bought Sinclair, so I worked for them until I retired in '88.
When you flew in Korea, can you describe your emotions towards combat missions?
Well, I think most of the time we were scared. I know the first time I dove on a target and saw all these firefly-looking things coming up, I said, golly, I believe they're shooting at me. And it didn't take me long to get rid of what ordnance I had and get the heck out of there. But it's kind of scary. They had different caliber of flak over there. You had some that was white. When it would bust, it would be white, and some of it was black. And that black was not good stuff. And you'd see all that popping around you, and you were a little bit nervous about it, I'll tell you. But I think one of the scariest things was being out there in cold weather when you had these big old rubber suits. We wore these rubberized suits, called them poopy bags. Then you'd have a kind of a survival jacket over that. Then you have your Mae West, and of course your parachute. And there's no way you could have bailed out of that plane other than turn it upside down and released your safety belt and fallen out. So, and being in that cold water, that water down there in the ocean was probably, I'd say, mid to high 30s, and you wouldn't live very long in that water. I think they told us if you weren't in a raft in 30 to 40 seconds, you were going to be so cold that you wouldn't be able to even function. So it was kind of scary knowing that you didn't have much time to get out of a plane, which may be upside down. And that was scary too, to think about having to get out of a plane upside down in the water. So there weren't many flights that I took off that I wasn't kind of scared.
What was the situation with enemy fighters at the time?
We had no enemy fighters. They were all up north, and the Air Force got to play with them. We didn't have any enemy fighters. We just went on our mission, dropped our bombs or strafed or whatever we had to do, and came on back out to the fleet. Now normally the fleet will be steaming a certain direction, but when they launch or take on aircraft, they'll turn into the wind. So whenever the flights come back to the carrier, then the whole fleet, you'll see them turning. They'll turn into the wind, so that gives you the best speed across the deck for landing. The more wind you have across the deck, the less airspeed you have to land. So anyway, when we'd get through our mission, we would fly back offshore, and if we had time and our leader wanted to, then he'd like to get into a tail chase. He liked to put us into about an 8-plane tail chase, and we'd do acrobatics. If you can imagine being in a loop with 8 planes going up, and each plane has got to be a little bit, if you're on the outside of the plane in front of you, got to have a little bit more power to stay up with it. So when you're down about number 8, you're working that throttle just like a pump, trying to keep up, trying to keep from overrunning or slow down in order to keep up with the plane in front of you. It's really kind of scary. Anyway, we'd go into these big old loops, and about 6th or 7th or 8th man, he'd be stalling out or spinning out, and then he'd be falling off to one side and you'd be falling off the other. So it got to be kind of scary up there every now and then. But that's what we do while we were waiting on the rest of the planes to come back. Because normally when they turned into the wind, you'd have jets coming in first. Well, maybe the jets have already been in. But anyway, you'd have the dive bombers coming back, and then you'd have us. So we'd do that activity.
Did you form friendships during your time in the service that you've kept up with?
Oh yeah. You form real close friendships, especially with the people your age. See, we had older pilots that were coming back from World War II that got called back in, and then there was a lot of us young fellas that were just out of flight training. So it was a mixture. And but you form awful close relations. I've still got a close relationship with a friend of mine out in California. He retired as a captain. He'd been a skipper of a ship, and he had an air group of his own, and several squadrons he'd been in. So you get awful close.
You remember the attitude of the country during World War II and then Korea. Was there a big difference between how people felt about them?
Yeah, I think there was a big difference. World War II, everybody was more closely knit, and they were fighting for their country more or less. But in Korea, it was different. We weren't at war. I mean, they weren't fighting us or anything. We were just over there fighting in a war that we really weren't sure exactly why we were there. We just got caught in, most of us. We didn't go into service to fight a war. I didn't. But I just got caught in it. But I guess once you're in it, you have to do the best you can.
And how did your service affect you, change you?
Well, I think the service made me grow up a lot faster. It matured me more, and I think without having that experience, I don't think I'd be the person I am today. So I think it was a good effect on me. Well, you learn to trust your fellow man when you're like in service. You had to put a lot of faith in the fellow that you were flying with, and I think you had a deeper appreciation for the country we live in. I think those are probably the two biggest lessons I learned.
What would you like to say to the young people of our generation?
Well, I guess I'd encourage you to go into service if you feel like you have the desire to do that, because I think I think it'd be good for everybody to have a little military service. Frankly, it's good training, it's good discipline. You learn how to get along with your fellow man, and a lot of people don't really have that experience of learning how to get along with people. I think that's one of our main problems, is we don't communicate and learn how to engage with our fellow man as much as we could.